Hello class, Sarah, Katie, and Elizabeth here to give you a brief introduction to the instructional method Just-in-Time Teaching, or JITT. In this lesson, you will learn about the theoretical framework and use of just-in-time teaching. The learning outcomes for this lesson are to formally define JITT, identify a number of JITT methods, and understand the learning theories that support the use of JITT. This is a teaching and learning method intended to focus class meetings on active learning by 1. Having students read and review other resources posted online and completing out-of-class assignments, warm-ups, or puzzles online. Then 2. Having instructors review their responses to assignments a few hours or the night before class, and then to adapt the in-class lesson to the needs of the students. This video is an example of a JITT.
First, we'll begin with the historical background of just-in-time teaching in order to give you a little bit more context before digging into the theoretical framework of this pedagogical method. First, it was developed in the 1990s through a collaboration between Gregor Novak and Andrew Gavrin of IUPUI, Evelyn Patterson of the U.S. Air Force Academy, and Wolfgang Christian of Davidson College. Their book, Just-in-Time Teaching, Blending Active Learning with Web Technology, was published in 1999 as a condensed resource covering this pedagogical method. It was originally developed as a tool to increase student engagement and student success in their undergraduate physics classrooms, but Gavrin, in a later publication, suggests that it has far-reaching applicability across fields and degree levels. And if you're wondering where the name comes from, it was actually an intentional nod to just-in-time manufacturing, which was developed by Toyota in the 1970s. Essentially, and without getting into too much muddy detail, this manufacturing process was developed to reduce the manufacturing times and then expedite the supply chain by minimizing the time between the products being created by the supplier and being received by the consumer. So you might want to consider this a feedback loop between the manufacturer and the consumer. So if you consider that just-in-time manufacturing wants to speed up the feedback loop between manufacturer and consumer, then just-in-time teaching, or JITT for short, has a very similar goal. This goal is to create a feedback loop of learning that is grounded in an intentional and fast-paced connection between the classroom and the web. In other words, web-based activities outside of the classroom are used to help prepare students for their subsequent in-class learning. In the next section of this presentation, we're going to discuss a variety of JITT applications, but it's really important to remember that its feedback loop occurs when students first listen or read or watch web-based material and then respond to a number of relevant and open-ended questions prior to class. This demonstrates the first point of JITT incorporating active learning approaches to both maximize in and out-of-class efficacy. During this web-based activity prior to class, students begin to construct new knowledge based on both their pre-existing knowledge as well as what they are learning in the activity. This construction of knowledge is captured by the instructor through the responses to the open-ended questions. These responses are reviewed by the instructor immediately before the subsequent in-class session, not as a way to grade the students, but as a way to determine how well they're understanding the material. These responses should also inform how the instructor actually will design their lesson in order to address any gaps in student understanding. This collaboration between students and instructor and the classroom and the web in the form of an immediate feedback loop creates a sense of team spirit so that everyone becomes invested in working together to learn. Before digging into the examples and applications of just-in-time teaching in the remainder of this presentation, it is worth summarizing what just-in-time teaching is and what it is not. As has already been alluded to, this pedagogical method differs from a traditional lecture method by requiring students to complete a web-based activity before they come to class, which essentially kickstarts the learning process. JITT is a web-based pedagogy after all, but it should not be conflated with distance learning or computer-aided learning. In a proper JITT scenario, the web-based materials are a supplemental pedagogical tool used to intentionally begin a learning feedback loop. Conversely, web-based materials used as an alternative for in-class activities and human interaction altogether, or web-based materials that do not include questions to be answered by students and reviewed by instructors, are not examples of just-in-time teaching. Relatedly, JITT is not to be seen as a simple online grading tool for instructors. If students answer a set of open-ended questions before class, but the instructor does not review the responses to inform their lesson, this is not an example of just-in-time teaching. Finally, in addition to the elements and goals discussed on the previous slide, it is also worth emphasizing that just-in-time teaching, when done correctly, can be an incredibly powerful pedagogical tool in increasingly diverse college classrooms. As Novak explains, students are entering our classrooms with different educational and cultural backgrounds, interests, ideas, and even levels of motivation. Research has shown that active learning environments increase teacher-to-student interaction, and the co-construction of knowledge in the classroom provides the individual encouragement that helps all students succeed.
Now that we've covered the theory and framework of JITT, let's take a look at some examples of JITT assignments. A web assignment may be a warm-up, which provides a feedback loop between in-class and out-of-class involvement. Visit the biology warm-up link provided below this video to see an example. Pause here to review the link if you'd like. Another example of a web assignment is a puzzle. Puzzles are used to provide closure on a topic, integrate concepts, and offer examples to form a basis for productive classroom dialogue. Visit the math puzzle link provided below this video to see an example. Again, pause here to review the link if you'd like. Another example of a web assignment may be a good for or enrichment activity. These enrichment activities are used to connect to the real world, aim to keep material fresh, and act to seed classroom discussion. Visit the Chemistry Good For link provided below this video to see an example. As with the other examples, please pause here to review the link if you'd like. The examples listed here are just a few examples of what a web assignment may be. Before we review and move on to the web assignment for this JITT, let's take a look at some of the drawbacks of JITT. One thing to consider is time. The instructor needs enough time to review assignments and prepare classroom activities to fit the needs of learners. Using JITT requires instructors to manage time well. Another thing to consider is how broad a topic can reasonably be to successfully implement JITT. Depending on the type of web assignment used, you will need to carefully consider how you will frame the classroom environment based on received responses. This requires instructors to plan lessons that allow for a range of approaches based on the responses to the web assignment. Now that we've defined JITT, explained the framework, theory, and drawbacks, and provided examples of JITT assignments, we will now ask you to consider the information covered in this video and respond to the questions in the Google form. The questions are: 1. What is the most difficult part of the material we will discuss in Saturday's class? In other words, what further clarifications may you need? 2. What is the most interesting part of the material? In other words, what piqued your interest, if anything? 3. How does the material connect to something else you have learned in this field or another field? Think about the other educational methods and topics you've learned to respond to this question. 4. How is the material useful or relevant or can be applied to your intellectual or career interests? In other words, how may you use this in your future or current roles? By watching this video and answering the questions asked in the Google form, you are completing the web portion of the JITT for this lesson. We, the instructors, will review all responses in order to frame our in-class discussion for the classroom portion of this JITT. As we've discussed in this presentation, the goal of using JITT is to set web assignments in preparation for a lesson in order to encourage active learning environments in the classroom. The assignment that learners complete prior to the classroom meetings may be considered an assessment. In class, we will discuss this further. For now, consider what you know about formative and summative assessments. Could a JITT be considered a formative or summative assessment? Keep this in mind. We will cover this in more detail in class.